Good day. My name is Stephan Pretorius. I'm the Global Chief Technology Officer for WPP, and I'm here to talk to you today about agent verification with Daniel Hulme, our Chief AI Officer here at WPP. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, Stephan.
Good to see you again.
Likewise.
The first question to you is, how do you see the progression of agents from what we understood 2 years ago as agents to what we're seeing today in the market?
Well, first of all, I guess agents have been around for a long time, actually. If you look at the history of AI, back in the 1950s, we started out with brains, and then agents, and then brains and agents, brains, and now agents again. But I guess what people think of an agent is something that has agency. At the moment, 2 years ago, large language models are obviously very good at creating content through language and imagery. And what was really remarkable 3 years ago is that by training a brain on enough language, it was able to somehow make sense of the world, some common sense of the world through language. When you have things that can make sense of the world, you can then actually give them agency, the ability to make decisions. And so really the difference between a large language model and an agent is that something that has agency, something that can act on the world and make decisions. I guess what's also quite exciting about agents is a concept called multi-agent reasoning. Really, for me, the power of agents isn't just clicking on websites and acting. It's actually getting them to collaborate and communicate to create knowledge that hasn't been created before. It's a concept called multi-agent reasoning, and for me that's really the true and exciting power of agents over the coming years.
So let's talk about more definitions. What is agent verification, and how is it different from evaluation, another term we hear a lot about?
Just like a graduate, you want to know whether that graduate has the capability to do its job. Evaluation is a mechanism, a set of tests to understand, is this able to do actually what you want it to do? Can it drive a car? Can it make sure that it can 3-point turn, parallel park, emergency stop? Sometimes actually evaluation is also being used to understand how good you are at your job. What verification is actually arguably is a superset of evaluation. It's not just understanding, can you do your job? Are you good at your job? But will you do things that are wrong? How do I come up with various different scenarios and tests to really stress test whether this thing actually not only has the capability of doing its job, or will it not do something stupid?
You spun out a deep research lab out of WPP last year called Conscium, and agent verification was one of Conscium's first use cases. What is Conscium's approach to verification, and why do you believe it's the right one? Well,
Conscium has a lofty goal, as you know, to try to understand whether we can and should build machines that are conscious. Now, of course, there's not a well-established necessarily definition of consciousness, nor a set of tests to understand whether something is conscious. So we're trying to pioneer and understand how to determine whether a system is conscious. And that means coming up with the tests to be able to do that. So it turns out that system that we've built to be able to test other systems is very valuable. It's valuable in the ability to test any agent for anything. So if you've built an agent to do media planning or drive a car, you need to understand that it can do its job and it doesn't do anything stupid. And now historically, what the way that we've tested agents is ask it questions and test its knowledge. In the car example, you might say, what's the stopping distance at 30 miles an hour? Can you identify hazards in this image? It's like a theory test. But of course, what you then want to do is test if it has the ability to do its job. Can you 3-point turn, parallel park, emergency stop? And then what you want to do is you put it in a real world situation, simulation, to be able to make sure that it can deal with ambiguous requirements, risk reward trade-offs, complex environmental factors. So Conscium's approach is not just to ask questions to determine knowledge, but to put it in complex simulations with multiple agents to thoroughly test whether this thing actually can do what you want it to do and also not do something silly. And what we've done is we've actually come up with a mechanism to get AIs to be great test creators. So it's able to actually come up with these scenarios to be able to stress test agents. Now, we know that it's almost impossible to exhaustively test software. I think anybody that's built software knows that it's impossible to 100% verify whether a piece of software is going to do what you want it to do. So we also enable human beings to come up with tests and actually create a marketplace of tests that humans have created that they can share across other organizations and other people. So what Conscium has created is a concept called VerifyAX. AX is a term that actually is going to become more popular. It means agents, so verify agents. And what we do is we put them in complex simulations to make sure that they are doing what we want them to do.
So you're basically saying human self verification is not enough? Because I think most people today in business would say, you know, they have a task in mind, they have a particular objective, they choose a model, they add the relevant data, they define the instructions and the tools, and then they look at the outputs and they evaluate whether those outputs are good and then decide whether to use them or not, right? Why is that not enough?
We've been in technology long enough to know that when you build and deploy software, at least 80% of the energy in deploying software is testing. It's coming up with the different scenarios to not just ensure that you're going to achieve the happy path, but you're thinking about all the failure points in which case this can cause problems. And actually, it's important to kind of distinguish two types of verification. There's one type of verification called non-functional verification, which is testing for security and resilience and performance, and that will be applicable to all agents. And then there's a concept called functional verification, which is, okay, I've built an agent that can optimize a media plan. Can it actually optimize the media plan, and can it do it well, and will it not make any silly mistakes? And so coming up with tests is actually still very much an engineering art. What's interesting also about agents, which is different to software, is that agents can actually adapt themselves in production. So for the first time ever, we can build software that can adapt themselves. So we now need to do continuous verification. We need to make sure that we're constantly watching and verifying that these agents are going to do what we want them to do.
One of the current big trends, I guess, in the agentic discussion is the deployment model. And, you know, as we sort of moved from, you know, static or passive agents, models plus data, instructions and tools, to more active or autonomous agents, there seems to be a divergence in the market, at least currently, between cloud-based sandboxes, so things like, OpenShell from NVIDIA and various other kind of providers, versus running agents on your local, basically with local computer use capabilities. And so this is quite a radical departure, because it's it's a complete break of the cloud first model. And it's going to be interesting. I think it's too early to see exactly which model is going to win out or how the two will coexist in the future. But from a verification perspective, which one of those two models, to your mind, poses a bigger verification risk?
Well, I guess the word sandbox means, by the word, it means that it's protected and hopefully it's safe. When it's on your local machine, it obviously has access to your tools, your data. So that's what worries me the most, is the agents that can go rogue on your local machine without having the right guardrails and governance in place to make sure that they're not going to do anything silly. So I actually think we'll probably end up having a hybrid approach, but we've got to make sure that we have the mechanisms in place to make sure that these technologies are verified. In some respects, the governance process has, you know, a handful of different stages. One is the identification of agentic needs. You know, there's lots of opportunities to apply agents across our organization. The second is then triaging those opportunities to either enabling people to innovate at the edge. So this is something that you should be building yourself, or utilizing a talented AI team like we have in WPP Satalia to make sure that we're building agents, super agents that can really do the job that we want them to do in a differentiated way. And then also, you know, buying in third-party agents and vendors that can do things that we don't want to be building ourselves. And what we need to do is make sure that we're triaging, we're building, we're testing, we're monitoring, we're sunsetting those agents across that different ecosystem. So I think that the companies that have a hybrid approach, innovate at the edge, build super agents, choose the right partners, are the ones that are going to win. And that means we have to have relatively sophisticated governance structures to make sure that we're monitoring all of these things that are going on.
Do you see a necessary evolution between the rise of agents on your local and the sort of notion of a personal digital twin and ultimately some kind of cyborg fusion. In other words, if you could build a personal digital twin that understands and documents and keeps everything that you've experienced and that you believe in a knowledge mesh that can ultimately augment you as a person, do you think that is the necessary path, or that's sort of the inevitable path?
Yeah, I guess from a marketing perspective, this is quite exciting for us because we know that people are using agents primarily actually as therapists. That's one of the biggest use cases. People are telling it their hopes, their dreams, their desires, their concerns. I guess the expectation is at some point those agents will be able to represent you in terms of making purchasing decisions or recommendations. So what's interesting for us from a marketing perspective is we now need to understand not only how do we market to human beings, but we now need to understand how to capture the attention of agents. And I think this is absolutely coming. We're not quite there yet, I guess, in terms of rollout, but I coined this term called extended liquid minds. And there was a paper from 1998, two of the world's leading thinkers in consciousness, Andy Clark and Chalmers, argued that actually we rely on technology and other things to extend ourselves beyond our own mind. And now what we're seeing is human beings building agents to extend ourselves. And I think that we're going to rely more and more on those agents, which means that they need to be verified, but they're also going to enable us to do amazing things. And so actually having agents that understand us, that can represent us, is going to allow us to be superhuman.
And it's going to be a really interesting kind of, as you said, combination between the personal, digital twin and then the organizational or company, knowledge mesh and enterprise, and how those two things combine, right? Because currently there aren't really kind of good anecdotes for that in the market.
No, that's right. I guess we have, in some respects, different personas. We'll have a work persona and a personal persona, and understanding what part of that knowledge mesh should represent you at different times of the day and whatnot is going to be a really interesting problem to solve. But it's coming and it's really exciting.
Last question. What is your favorite agent today?
Well, obviously I'm a big fan of the WPP agents, but arguably Claude Code isn't an agent, but I've set my Claude Code up in a way that allows me to build software when I'm not there. And in fact, one of the things that I'm working on right now is I'm revisiting my master's project. My master's project 23 years ago was in agents, actually. I built a primordial soup of different kind of biological capability and watched what happened. And what was amazing is that you had this intelligent emerge without having being told what these agents should do. And what I decided to do now is revisit that. I've forgotten the ability to code, so now I'm getting Claude Code to code for me. So now Claude Code is actually right now recreating this primordial soup. And actually today I've just created my first 1,000 multicellular agent. And I think this is exciting because the agents that we know of go from language to world model. They understand the world through language, and that's not always the best way of understanding the world. They make mistakes. There's obviously researchers out there that are now trying to build from the world model to language, and I think that's a very exciting approach, which is what I'm working on.
Super exciting. Yeah. Love to see what comes from it.
Excellent.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks, Stephan.